Well, while we wait for a couple of minutes for everyone, welcome. Thanks a lot for joining the webinar. We are here for presenting the research about navigating dreams and precarity. That was a research done by some researchers in the youth group of ECVC. And it's about working on learning conditions of youth agriculture workers, interns, and volunteers across Europe. We're going to wait a couple of minutes before starting.
And maybe just while we wait, I can explain, if anybody doesn't know, there's interpretation in English, French, and Spanish in the webinar. So to access that, there's just at the bottom a small globe, and you can choose the language that you wish to listen to. We also have a Q&A available for questions that you'd like to pose to the speakers at the end of the session. And the chat should be open to all participants, and that's for more general discussion. You can write to any of the ECVC team if you have any technical issues. Thank you very much.
Cool. So I think it's 5 minutes past. I think we can start. So welcome everyone. Very excited. My name is Edu, and together with my friend Pier Francesco, we're going to be facilitating this this call. Welcome to the ECVC webinar. Together we are presenting a really exciting research we've been doing already for 1.5 years, I think. The way we call it, this publication, it was Navigating Dreams and Precarity, Working and Learning Conditions of Young Agriculture Workers, Interns, and Volunteers across Europe. Before starting and getting to the practical things, I'm going to repeat quickly what Alicia said. We have the webinars are available in different languages, so if you can go to the interpretation and choose your own preferred language. I will ask to all those people speaking, be mindful about if it's your native language or not. Please speak slowly and carefully. At the same time, the chat is open, but if you have some questions, please put them in the Q&A. And all the questions from the audience will be answered at the end of the webinar. We will have 15 to 20 minutes for this part, so please keep it for later. Regarding the structure of the webinar, I'm going to have a quick introduction about ECVC and the youth and also the research we're presenting. Then I'm going to give the floor to my comrade Hati, which is going to explain a little bit what we learned from this research. I'm going to give them the floor to Barbara and Priscilla, the two researchers and activists who conduct the whole research. And then I'm going to give the floor to Pierre, and Pierre is going to introduce the external guest before going to the questions and the questions from the audience. If I'm not forgetting anything about practical things of the webinar, would love to introduce first ECVC, the European Coordination of Via Campesina. then going to the youth articulations, and quickly going why we are talking about this topic about youth working conditions in agriculture. But briefly, I want to say that we are members, like some of us are members of ECVC, which is the European Coordination of Via Campesina, which belongs to the worldwide peasants organization, which is called La Via Campesina, which we are fighting for food sovereignty, agroecology, and the peasant rights, which these are the three point that represents the essence of the political vision of this international peasants movement. Within the ECVC, we have some working groups like the land, climate, peasant rights, gender and sexual diversity, the youth articulation, seeds, policy, women, trade, agroecology, and others. And within ECVC, it's a European-wide organization. We are horizontally organized, and there's always this intersection between several articulations and the working groups. Briefly, this research that we're presenting today has been conducted by the two researchers that are going to talk later, together with the youth articulation of Via Campesina. And quickly, I want to say that that was a really important topic for youth, explaining what's the reason that for young people it's quite complicated and quite difficult, not very sexy to start farming. So we spent this year and a half of research trying to understand which are the reasons. And yeah, Hattie, Barbara, and Priscilla will explain the results on that, and putting emphasis how important it's for ECVC to create this place of exchanging knowledge between young people, between academics, between researchers, between politicians, in order to fight for peasant rights, agroecology, and food sovereignty. After saying this, Hattie, very happy to give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eddie. I'm going to present a summary of our main findings on this report. And once I've proposed these, shown these 7 findings, I'm going to tell you about the Youth Articulation's proposals as an outcome of the research. Some of these words are taken from the report, and some are my own interpretation as a young person reading this report. I have some slides. Alicia, it would be great to have these slides shared at this point. Is Alicia here?
Yes, I'm trying to solve this. You cannot share with your computer, Ati?
Alicia has the slides to share.
Okay, I will do it. 1 second.
Thank you. Shall I start talking, and then, because the slides are not so important. So the first finding of the project is that small-scale organic farmers don't get a decent income for their work. And this is the context in which young people find themselves, where they're looking for work and training. This context puts the training of all future peasants farmers in jeopardy. Because this leads us on to our second finding of the report, which is that young people are making huge, unrewarded contributions to peasant farming now and in the future. Many young agricultural workers who are new to farming do unpaid work out of solidarity with farmers who are struggling financially and emotionally. They do this despite the fact that they do not agree with the idea that certain groups have to give free labour. They do it because they hope to learn skills and contribute to a different agricultural future. So this is moving on to slide 3, please. Yeah. Oh, no, back one. No? Okay, I'll just carry on. So the third finding of the project is that experience gained through volunteering, which is a common route for many young agricultural workers in the agroecology sector, it's not sufficiently recognised. Volunteering and informal training are not formally recognised as work experience, which means that volunteers are not able to access social security, and their experience does not count towards the hours needed to enter formal training, acquire farmer status, or find paid agricultural jobs. The fourth finding is that these types of unpaid and alternative work are really common entry points into peasant and agroecological farming, but this reinforces inequalities. Many young people cannot afford to do unpaid work or long internships or apprenticeships for a stipend below the living wage. This further reinforces inequalities along class, race, and gender. We also looked at another finding, which is finding number 5. In a struggling farmer sector, mechanisms have been put in place to support farmers, to hire people easily and flexibly. While these mechanisms are important and help with the difficulties farmers face in recruiting seasonal workers, they are designed from the perspective of the employer, and they make jobs for young workers even more precarious. This is the case with 0 hours contracts, freelance work, which does not offer workers any income guarantee. Too often, the lived experience of workers are made invisible. Our 6th finding is that working and learning cannot be separated. Even if no formal training is provided, young people work in order to learn. However, not all work settings are appropriate for learning. Often, young people find themselves in precarious situations that do not allow them to learn and develop their self-confidence. The workspaces themselves rarely create the best conditions to observe, experiment, question, and transmit. There are successful initiatives that support the hosting and training farms, which could be expanded. These are self-organized training networks. In some places, examples of support schemes exist that financially support farms hosting apprentices and interns. Finally, the 7th finding in the report is that structural changes are needed to make agriculture work, including for young people. As affirmed by the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas, young agricultural workers are entitled to safe and healthy working conditions, work opportunities, and an adequate standard of living. Young agricultural workers are learning organic and agroecological farming in very harsh conditions, including no or reduced pay, inadequate housing, food, and support. This limits the possibility for socially and ecologically just food system transformations. If we want to achieve farm generational renewal across Europe, it will be key to improve the youth's learning and working conditions. So to continue, based off the findings of this research, these 7 main findings, although there is plenty more in the report, and I really recommend you go to read that, because these findings are very simplified and the report is very rich. This group of young agroecological workers and willing to be farmers demand, number 1, more support for the farms and farm networks that are hosting and training young workers. Adequate learning spaces should be provided across all working arrangements in volunteering and paid labour. Learning expectations should be discussed before and during work experiences, but this cannot be achieved without more support for the farms and farm networks that are hosting and training young workers. Our second demand is safe and healthy working conditions for all young agricultural workers. And our third demand is acknowledgement of the work that young people are contributing to peasant farming, particularly by formally recognising all types of work experience that young people have access to. Everyone involved should acknowledge that what volunteers contribute is work. We want volunteering and all kinds of internships to be formally recognised as work experience, to enable access to social security and also count towards the hours needed to enter formal training, acquire farmer status, or find paid agricultural jobs. Thank you so much for listening. Now we can pass on to Barbara and Priscilla, who conducted the research, and they'll have plenty more to say to explain how we got to these findings.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Hadi. And I'm going to briefly introduce Barbara and Priscilla, but not before saying that thanks a lot happy for all the work we've been doing with the youth articulation on this research the last year. And so I want to introduce quickly to Barbara and Priscilla. They've been working with us with the youth articulation for the last year, conducting this research and all the interviews, amazingly done. There are two researchers from the Agroecology, Water and Resilience, CAWR, Coventry University of UK. And they are going to explain out a bit about the study methodology and the findings of this research. Thanks once more. I think you're mute. Okay.
Yeah.
There we are.
Thank you for this introduction. So good afternoon from our side. Myself, I am Barbara van Dyck, and together with Priscilla Claeys, we will be giving some further insights in the methodology as well as the findings of the study that brings us together here today. We are both working at the Center for Agroecology, Water and Resilience in Coventry University, as just mentioned, and a little bit more than a year ago now, we were approached by the ECVC Youth to collaborate on a study of the working and learning conditions of young agricultural workers, interns, and volunteers in Europe. And so to give a little bit of context to the findings of the study that Hattie just presented. So we spoke with 21 agricultural workers of different genders in 12 countries. They were all younger than 40 years old, and they were almost exclusively white Europeans. Many of them have some ties of the land, but come from urban backgrounds. And we want to stress that the people we spoke to, they represent the ECVC youth and their networks, not young agricultural workers in general. So we spoke with people with different experiences, ranging from volunteering, formal internships, or paid land workers, and many people also combine these experiences. They work or have been working as vegetables growers on family or small cooperative farms. Some work on mixed farms, small dairy farms, or in the food sector. And the study also includes insights from shepherds and alpers working with cows. Important to note is that many of the young agricultural workers in Europe today, as they do not come from a farming background, they enter farming also later in life. They have often university diplomas and work experiences outside the farming sector before starting to farm. And while this is not the case for all the young agricultural workers we spoke to, doing farm work is often a deliberate choice to contribute to a more sustainable future in a very hands-on way.
Thank you, Barbara. And I want to say it's been a pleasure to do this research collaboratively with the Youth Articulation. And in the tradition of participatory action research, from the beginning, we actually decided together on the objectives of the research and the methodology as well. So as was stated, for us, it was really interesting and our goal to assess and understand both the working and the learning conditions, understanding the profiles, motivations, and hopes of the various youth that we spoke to, and also how working and learning interact in different work conditions, environments. I will skip that one because I think it's already been mentioned that we spoke to people who are not new entrants, but who are aspiring to become farmers and who mostly do not come from agricultural background. This has a major implication in terms of what they know and the trajectories that are available to them when they want to learn. Also because most of them are interested in organic farming, and the possibilities for learning these types of practices are still limited across the EU. So our focus was really on the labor dimension. And as was stated already, we kind of found three main categories of youth. So those doing volunteer or woofing, which we called unpaid work. Those doing internships and apprentices, which in the literature is usually called alternative labor, and those doing wage work, which is typical paid work. It is important, and it's been mentioned already, to say that these are not three distinct categories, in the sense that a same person can combine these three types of labor, both at the same time or over time. And it is also important to mention that a lot of small organic farms in Europe actually rely on this type of labor, especially the first two categories. So rely on volunteer labor and interns, because the cost of labor on farms is so high that it is really important for them to have access to this free or cheap labor. So our objective was really to look at the contracts and insurance, social security conditions that youth are employed under, their hours, working hours, the food, housing circumstances that they face, the type of pay or compensation that they receive. So often it will be food or housing or learning, the type of farm that they work on, the type of relationship that they have to their employer, their ability to negotiate better terms for their contracts, and how the opportunities are for learning. So I'll skip that. This is, again, a recap of the different types of labor that we found and that we found useful to kind of do our analysis on, build on our analysis on. And so I will go later to our key findings, again, reinforcing what Ati shared, but I really want to state here the main tension that we identified and that is at the heart of our report, is that basically, as I mentioned, young entrants, young farmers need to find work or learning opportunities on small organic farms, which are themselves struggling with paying and finding labor. This means that they really find work and learn opportunities in a already very stressful and precarious environment. And so it is therefore really important to address the issue of lack of income for current peasants in Europe if we want to really provide good working and learning conditions for the youth. So we use this image that is really the two sides of the same coins. As long as peasants in Europe are facing difficult conditions, it will be almost impossible for the youth to learn and work in good conditions on these farms.
So as Priscilla was mentioning, in the study, we have been looking at different working conditions, around the working conditions broken down in numbers of hours, pay, the housing and food people have access to, the sort of contracts, and the way people are coping with living in a quite precarious living situation. As for now, we will not go into the details of the findings for each of these dimensions separately. This can be found in the report. But there is one remarkable point that we wanted to highlight today, and that is the ambivalence that exists around the pay for young agricultural workers. And what do we mean with that? Young agricultural workers, as Priscilla mentioned, they are often not paid, but when workers are paid, they often refer to receiving a minimal wage. And while this is little money as such, it is sometimes still more than the peasant farmers that employ them. So this is a kind of particular situation in a sector of where farmers are struggling themselves and where they seek to fill the labor gap through unpaid interns, volunteers, or low-paid jobs. And the young people that are working there motivated to build a better agriculture, this leads to this ambivalence that I want to share a few quotes with you. There was this, for example, one young farmer saying, "It was okay for me not to get paid because the employer, have not a salary either." But that being said, doesn't mean that people are not feeling at unease about it. As another young farmer mentioned, at the beginning, I did not care about not being paid, but after a while, I felt it was not so cool that so many people rely on voluntary work and that so many young people want to work and don't care about payment, so that it gets normal. So I think this key tension is something to keep in mind when thinking about the consequences of the outcome of the study. And Priscilla?
Okay, so we would now like to summarize some key findings, again, reinforcing what Ati just mentioned. And if we have time, we want to highlight some ways that we have considered that could help address the situation. I'm not sure how much time we have left. You know?
Couple of minutes.
Couple of minutes. Okay, so I'll try and be brief. So we have 6 key points that we want to highlight. First, we really want to reaffirm that we found very difficult experiences on the ground and youth facing challenging situations, both when it comes to their body, so the physical work, the pain, the difficult working conditions, to their mind, the monotony, the responsibility they face, and the soul feeling lonely, isolated, and not having a support system in place and reporting mechanisms that they can use to kind of share and report these difficult situations. And I've listed here, but you can also find some of these ideas in the report and in the political work that ECVC will be doing around this to address this situation. But as Hati was mentioning, identifying ways to recognize volunteer experience as work would be key here, as well as providing, for example, financial support, a kind of living wage to youth who are working on farms throughout their learning trajectory would be key to ensure that they don't face these difficult situations. Was mentioned by Hati already, but just to reinforce this point, so we found that a lot of initiatives exist across the EU, and we really welcome that, to enable farmers to hire labor in a flexible and easy manner. But we feel like not enough attention has been paid to the workers who are on the other side of these mechanisms. And we found many youth who are, using on 0-hour contract, not knowing when they will have time and hours working on the farms, and really, on the other side of the flexibility. So we think this is really an important aspect that should be monitored. Key finding 3, it hasn't been mentioned in depth so far, but you will find more details in the report. It's the gender discrimination, intersectional discrimination aspect, and racialization that we find throughout the food and agriculture system. In Europe, we found many testimonies of youth saying that, sexist comments and continue to prevail or to be pervasive, and that the presence of gender-assigned roles is still very strong in agriculture. For example, female youth finding it really hard to have opportunities to learn how to use a tractor, for example, because this is not something that will be proposed to them. And so we feel it's really important to, again, support both the youth who are learning and the farms who are hosting them, to really provide everyone with an opportunity to become a farmer, and not only those male youth from privileged backgrounds who can afford to go through these many years of experiences and internships and volunteering on different farms. Key finding number 4, it's the Learn Working Challenge. So again, we've mentioned this briefly. Because young people are a source of labor on small organic farms, they tend to be mostly given repetitive, monotasking type of activities, which kind of prevents their opportunity, which kind of limits their opportunities for learning. And so many of them said there's things that they can never learn. Either if they don't stay a long time on the farm, they will not learn the full farming cycle, or they will never learn how to run the farm because they're just, again, used as labor to do rather simple tasks. So again, we find it's really important to provide support to the farms who are hosting the youth, and also support the youth who are working on these farms, with identifying also the right farms where they can learn the right skills. Finally, as I said earlier, the failure to provide a decent income to peasant farmers is what is putting the training of future farmers in danger. So it's really important to structurally address this problem, also to ensure generational renewal in the future. And finally, key finding number 6, we were actually quite surprised to hear and understand from the aspirations of the young people we spoke to that not all of them see themselves becoming the single head of a farm. Many of them want to establish collective farms. Some of them also want to become a salaried worker on the farm and have a kind of stable employment opportunity. So I think it's really important to also create kind of legal structures that enable collective units and cooperatives to be set up, but also to create employment opportunities for youth who want to not set up a farm on their own, considering that it's really hard to do these days in light of high cost of land and the high investments that are needed to set up a farm. I think this was our last slides, and thank you so much for the opportunity. And I really want to say again, it was a great learning also for us and great pleasure to work with the very active ECVC Youth Collective.
Well, thanks a lot to Barbara and Priscilla for these very clear interventions, and above all for the great work they did to coordinate and carry out this research. Thanks also go, of course, to the 21 young land workers from the 4 corners of Europe who participated and made this study possible. I would like to emphasize that as the ECVC Youth Articulation, we see this document as a starting point and not as an end result. Our way of working, and the previous interventions also pointed this out earlier, starts from the collective analysis of the needs and the demands that young farmers or aspiring farmers share in our group. This is why the evidence emerging from the study will be the basis for future reflections on how to try to change the scenario of agricultural work in Europe. We did the same with regard to the CAP, when in 2021, we published a position paper on the reform that was going through a crucial moment. In 2017, the European Court of Auditors had already reported that the youth policies of the CAP 2007-2020 were ineffective in facilitating the entry of new farmers. Despite that, the issues concerning youth and generational renewal has been once again neglected in the new CAP reform. And these problems originate from a lack of consideration, but also from a lack of knowledge of youth issues in the agricultural sector. So the lack of data becomes a lack of consequent policies. New farmers, as we have witnessed it and personally experienced, usually born first as agricultural workers, and therefore have to pass through the bottlenecks, the obstacles of training, internships, and labor. These issues are really interlinked, as this study shows, and we need to address this all together and to make this process smoother. This is why we believe so much in sharing our demands with decision makers and political actors. So today we have the honor to have with us Ms. Isabel Carvalhais, member of the European Parliament, part of S&D Group, and Ms. Maria Gafo Gomez Samayoa, representing DG Agri, Unit B3, Social Sustainability. We invited also Mr. Arnd Spahn, Politically Secretary of the Agricultural Sector of the Trade Union Federation EFAT, which had some problems in joining us. We are waiting for him, but right now I'm really pleased to start this dialogue, this question and answer session with our 2 guests. We welcome you once again, and we are grateful to you for accepting our invitation. We would like to ask you a few questions that will help us to get your feedback on our report and on our work. We will have a first round of questions, which you can answer in about 7 minutes, and then a shorter round of about 3 minutes each. And finally, we hope to have a chance to share some questions directly from the audience we are collecting via chat. I would like to start with MEP Ms. Isabel Carvalhais, that also maybe have to leave earlier. So thank you for joining. Ms. Carvalhais is particularly active on the topic of generational renewal as a rapporteur of an own initiative procedure of the European Parliament on this topic. So I would like to ask her, what are the working priorities of the European Parliament when it comes to youth labor in agriculture? How do you think the findings of our report could be integrated in some ways in the work of the EU Parliament, referring in particular to the INI report, but also having regard to the ECVC proposal of a land directive we are also working in these months. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this most kind invitation of the Youth Articulation of European Coordination of Via Campesina. I'm very glad to join you today, even in this short period of time. And thank you for your kind words. You mentioned, indeed, I have now the honor of being the Parliament's rapporteur for the Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development's initiative report on generational renewal. And I should say that I read very carefully this report, and it definitely, it's a very inspiring one. I already had the opportunity to look at other stuff that the Youth Articulation of the European Coordination of the Via Campesina sent me on land grabbing and land concentration. And so these are issues that I'm very, very much interested. And of course, when we talk about generational renewal, we concentrate very much our attention in young farmers and their needs, which is okay, and we must do that. But we also tend to overlook the young workers in farms. And I must thank you for bringing this theme of the young workers in farming into the political agenda. And with this particular timing, I can tell you that this is a point that I am raising in my draft report, which is the need to ensure adequate work and living conditions and social protection to young farm workers. In particular, I should also say, when we talk about women and migrant workers, and most of the times migrant workers are also those who are more racialized workers, more subject to all sorts of layers of discrimination. When I was reading your very interesting study on the young agricultural workers, I came across with a particular sentence, and I quote, which struck me, which was, "For many parents and other relatives of young agricultural workers, it is hard to imagine that becoming a farmer, a shepherd, or a landowner is a wise choice." Why should this be? But this is a reality. This perception of farming as a very hard profession, which is with a difficult work-life balance and very little public recognition. And also one, of course, with low income, in particular when we talk about small-scale farming. So this all gives a view about farming as a non-attractive, as an unattractive activity. But more than a job, and this is another sentence, more than a job, we know that farming usually is a way of life. With very close ties to nature, connected to a strong sense of community belonging. It's a way of life that generates benefits for society as a whole. And the big problem is to make society to recognize this. And it's, as you mentioned also in the report, it's not really a career choice, it's more a lifestyle choice. A lifestyle choice, okay, that's true, but one that must guarantee a fair and dignified income and quality of life for young farmers and for their families and for all young workers in the farms. The European Parliament, in my view, has been instrumental in defending the protection of workers, especially the most vulnerable, such as migrants, racialized workers, women, non-binary workers, and so forth. And I'm very proud to say that my political group has been in the front line of this combat. And for instance, we have introduced the social conditionality in the new CAP regulation. It may sound a little thing, but this happens, in fact, for the first time in 60 years of the CAP. The social dimension was introduced with one clear objective, is that no more European funds will be hence allocated to those who do not respect workers' rights. It's incredible that after 60 years, we still have to say this and to put this as a conditionality, because this shouldn't be happening, but we know that unfortunately this is not so. But we have also been in the front line of defending dignifying labor and social rights for all young workers, fighting, for instance, this phenomenon of unpaid internships, of apprenticeships without access to social security, or at the end of which you don't get the recognition of the amount of hours and the certification for for whatever you have been doing. I'm not saying that internships are not important. They are very important, and they are ways, of course, of gathering experience, and it can be a sort of a win-win exchange between workers and employers. That's fine, but it cannot work as a sort of blackmail for many young people. And this happens in farms, this happens in the agricultural sector, as it happens in many other sectors across society. And besides, not only internships and apprenticeships, and you mentioned in this report, and I find it really, really important to mention this, not only they are sometimes a way to get cheap labor and to get workforce, labor force for free, there is also the problem that they tend to deepen the cycle of social inequalities among young people, because most likely those who can afford to accept an unpaid internship in a farm will come from a middle class background with some sort of financial help from their families. Otherwise, it's unbearable, especially if we're talking about a period of 1 year, 2 years of internships, something like that. Sometimes even 3 months is already a lot, or even 1 month. So this already creates a non-level playing field among young workers in as I say, in farms, as in many other jobs, unfortunately. So what we say is every work is worth a pay. And that is why the Parliament has very recently adopted a resolution that condemns the practice of unpaid internships, unpaid traineeships, apprenticeships, whatever, all sorts of alternative work, which actually are meant on many occasions to exploit young people's work and to violate their rights. And we call also to the Commission to table a legal framework for an effective and enforceable ban on these practices. Of course, it will take time. It will take a lot of time to change mentalities, to change behaviors, and to solve many of these problems. But I'm confident that this groundbreaking European legal frame will significantly improve in the long run the working conditions of young workers in the sector, also in agriculture. Of course, we need to remain very vigilant, and we need to see how this all will be implemented in member states. And this is something that I think it could also have space in this report that I'm working on. Just to finish, another problem has to do with the bargaining power of young workers. Usually, it's very low, their bargain capacity. So we need also strong legislative frameworks and more inspections in the field, so to speak. And inspections, obviously to control if this strong legislative framework is actually being respected. First we need the framework, and then we have to monitor the respect of it. But they are very important, and they are key also to fight against the prevailing conservative images on the roles of women, and also to fight the gender discrimination and the violence that still prevails in the agricultural sector in general terms. Another aspect I would like to highlight is the role of cooperatives, of farmers, organizations, and all sorts of collaboration that can help young farmers and young farm workers to overcome many barriers, to provide guidance services, to enhance their participation in the policy dialogue. I think association, cooperatives are really, really important to boost and to bring scale, to bring evidence to the voices of young people working in the agricultural sector. I know that your study did not cover, for methodological reason, also did not cover the experiences of young migrant people. But given my academic background in sociology, in the integration of migrants, and I must say that this all started in Coventry many years ago at Warwick University, these migrant workers will also be in my thoughts for this report. It's something I could not even think otherwise, so I will include them definitely. And I know, as I said, this is a methodological choice because we have to make choices when we're doing field work, but it's also very important that we think about the intersectional and the the racialized migrant workers and all those who suffer even more from combining different layers and different conditions that expose them to discrimination. So being young, working in the fields is already difficult, and then you have all these layers making it even worse, these situations. So this will also be in my draft report. And of course, as I said, this study really is important also and inspiring for this draft report on generational renewal. And we can't think about generational renewal but without thinking very seriously how we can dignify the working conditions of our young farmers and young workers in farms. So I would stop here for this initial participation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Isabel, for the inspiring words. So many things to comment. I hope we have time for the second quick round of questions if you don't have to leave. Really appreciate your comments. So we're going to move to Maria Gaffo Gomez Amaya. Thanks a lot for being here. Pierre already introduced herself, so I'm going to jump directly to the question we prepared for you. The question is regarding the CAP, which says which policies in the current CAP can be implemented to improve the conditions of young people who wants to live and works as a small-scale farmer, and why is this threshold of mandatory measurements for MS so unambitious, facing the impressive aging of farming population? What can you say?
Thank you very much, Edu, and thanks for inviting us to participate. Actually, I can present you now some hints about what the CAP is doing in this respect, but just to say that I came also to listen. I was listening very carefully to the presentation by Barbara and Priscilla, because of course these elements which are entering for the first time in the CAP are very relevant for us. And I fully agree with Pier Francesco that we need further data. So just for your information, we are launching also a study on the working conditions in agriculture, because Isabel mentioned the social conditionality that we have for the first time in the CAP, and I should recognize that this is a good step forward put by the European Parliament, and in our unit social conditionality, of course, we were very, very happy to have it, but it is just a little first step in this direction, and of course it's something that needs to probably continue and be increased in the future CAP, and in order to do so we need to have further data and further information. And now, just to reply to the question of Edu on the CAP, I would like to mention that, as you all know, of course, the population of the European Union is aging. This trend is even stronger in rural areas and even more stronger in agriculture. However, if we look at the situation across the member states, it's very, very different. So we have in one end the case of Austria, where more than 23% of the farmers are less than 40 years old. And at the other end, we have the country of Isabel Carvalhais, Portugal, Greece, and my home country, Spain, with around only 6 and 7%. And therefore, one fits-for-all solution doesn't work. A rigid approach does not work. Furthermore, I think it's important also to recognize that there are a lot of challenges for generational renewal, which are out of our hands. They are in the national competence, like, for example, access to land. I think it is important, of course, to look at the budgetary threshold. It has been increased compared to the previous commitment period. But what I think it is particularly important is to look at other elements, like, for example, the strategies. So now in the CAP strategic plans, we ask the countries to ensure that generational renewal is put forward in the CAP strategic plans. And in these strategies that the member states report about, they combine both the CAP with other measures at national or regional level. Another element that I think should be highlighted is that generational renewal is now one of the 9 specific objectives of the CAP, and therefore it is one of the key parameters that we are using to assess the strategic plans. I don't know if all of you are aware about the new CAP, but I like to compare it with a menu with a blood test. A menu, which is the menu that we offer to the member states to reply to the different challenges, opportunities, etc. they have. And then the blood test is we do an analysis of the situation in the different countries. And one of the parameters that we measure in the blood test is this generational renewal. So the CAP strategic plans have been adopted at the end of the year, all of them, and now they start to be implemented. And we have seen in all the plans that the strategies to benefit the young farmers normally include a combination of several interventions, first pillar and second pillar, including, for example, income support, investments that have higher rate for young farmers, or cooperation, so facilitating networking, putting different young farmers together. We have this budgetary threshold of at least 3%, but we see that member states go in a number of cases much up. So, for example, in the case of Malta, they dedicate more than 21% to young farmers. We have also, of course, a number of countries that they just respect the 3%. In almost all cases, member states allocate funding through a combined support covering both first and second pillar. And I think 25 member states use this complementary income support for young farmers, and almost all use the startup under the rural development. In terms of budget, we have 8.5 billion that will help young farmers set up, invest, and maintain their business. And in the 2023-2027 period, according to what member states have told us, we expect to have a total of 377,000 new young farmers that will be established in full capacity, which I hope it will be fulfilled, because I think it's a very good aspiration and objective. We have, by experience, an assessment that a strategic and integrated approach, including both the CAP and the national measures, is necessary in order to increase the delivery of the CAP generational renewal measures. And then, as I mentioned, there is also a lot of importance on the national factors that have a big impact, like, for example, the regulating access to land or succession law, which are national competence. And in these strategies that I mentioned before, the member states must examine the interplay between the national instruments, pensions schemes, loan schemes, etc., and then the CAP interventions. I take, just to conclude also, I would like to refer to some other tools which are a little bit outside of the scope of young farmers, but where we are pushing also for generational renewal. And this is the case of the LEADER program, the local action groups, local development. During the negotiations with the member states, we have asked member states to ensure a higher participation of young people and women in the decision-making bodies of the local action groups, because we want really to have new blood entering into these groups. And just to conclude, we are fully aware that it is impossible to ensure the future sustainability of agriculture and rural areas without youth. And I would add also that without women neither. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. We hope to have the chance to go deep in these issues and to start reflecting how to use these tools in different member states, even because the situation, as you mentioned, in all the member states is very diverse. I would like to come back to Ms. Carvalhais before she leaves. Also inviting her also to comment on this intervention from the DG Agri, but I would like also to introduce a different topic. First of all, we really welcomed, I think, the high ambition of some members of the European Parliament, as you, for establishing a different framework about youth labor in agriculture and access to land. Unfortunately, as we mentioned, there are really different situations and different ambitions between member states that we are trying to address also as a European coordination via Campesina. Another issue that we are facing is that the narrative about agroecology, which is something that we really care about, often is facing a difficult to be integrated in some ways in the formal paths and formal opportunities of training, and yes, mostly on training also. We are working on the policies, but we on the fields, we feel the need to address this issue that maybe too often agroecological trainings are not recognized by the official, we can say, institution. And for example, in higher studies or in the universities, we are starting to see also some specific courses, but we would like to know if the European Parliament can do something for integrating this kind of trainings also for the helping the entrance of youth in the work of labor.
Okay, thank you. It's a complex question. I will not provide a sound answer, but I'll give you my very candid opinion on this. As I see it, and obviously this is a perception, I think that more and more we find young people in the agricultural sector who have higher levels of education. So the profile of farmers is changing. Of course, the majority of farmers are older people. Many of them don't have this high level of education and so forth. But the new ones, the ones that are entering the sector, tend to have higher levels of education. And I think this is important because they also bring it's not just the awareness, because even those who have less or less high degrees of education, they are also aware, but sometimes less able, I suppose, to convey, to transmit these perceptions. But as I was saying, those who have higher levels of education are much more aware and capable of communicating this awareness about the importance of new ways of working the fields, new ways of doing agriculture, new ways of farming. Uh, they know, and we know, that young farmers will be the most affected by the environmental by the environmental crisis, by the need of environmental sustainability, by the need to mitigate the impact of climate change. They are very much aware, and I think, again, going back to the idea of cooperation, cooperatives and organizations, I think it's very important that they have these fora, these places, these agoras of discussion and also of decision making regarding their job, their work, their plans, their farms, precisely to work as political actors, capable of making pressure upon political decisions regarding these concerns they have. So I see, I may be wrong, but I see young farmers as much more capable of being able to organize themselves and being heard and doing pressure over the political different actors, the political levels, different levels, including the European level of decision making. Of course, we cannot force, and the European Parliament cannot force, and I don't even think this would be, definitely it would not be democratic, and it would not be a good way to go, which was to imagine a world where we limit the options in terms of farming methodology. So what we can do is create the context for society to realize that it is important to have more sustainable food systems, that we need more sustainable forms of agriculture. And we have been doing this, doing a lot of work, calling attention to agroecological practices, and they need support. A best way to get uh, young people trained in agroecological practices is to make sure that you have ways to certificate, that you have access to traineeships, access to courses, to practical courses that are being financed. It's a way to mobilize, it's a way to incentivize people to adhere to these practices. And many of these practices have roots in the past. They were not completely unknown. In fact, many of them were very well known by our ancestors, by our parents, by our grandparents. And somehow along the way, they were put aside in the name of a new paradigm of production and so forth. We are now trying to revert, we're trying to change, and we're calling attention to organic production, to agroecological practices. But and I think someone coming from an academic background could not say otherwise, could not say or could not have a different position. We have to be open to different ways. At the end of the day, what's important is to make sure that we have more sustainable and resilient forms of productivity. maybe they will not be all agroecological practices. Maybe they will not be all organic production. There can be other ways, and we should not disregard, because science is very important, and I believe a lot in science and how it can improve the ways for sustainability. So it's not up to us to say this is just the only way possible. But we have to create the context to make society more aware of the fact that we need to change the way we produce our food. And it is important, as I was saying, that these young farmers and young people willing to join agriculture as workers, as having their own business, or working for someone, it doesn't matter, that they also have the opportunity to have traineeships, internships, apprenticeships, whatever, academic courses that have some sort of public support. And this implies also support to those who are providing a traineeship to these young people. Many, they want to be working in small scale farming, but small scale farming, small farmers, they have great difficulty, even lack of time, to give time to these young people, to provide them traineeship, and at the same time to work the field. So sometimes for them, it's much more complicated for them to provide good traineeship than for a big company, a big farm. So they need support so that they can also release time and have more availability to welcome these young people and to provide whatever they need for their future certification. And also, for instance, universities that are connected, very much implemented in rural areas, they should be attentive to the needs of those areas. And they should, for instance, when we are in an industrial area, we tend to see universities creating or betting in PhDs, in master degrees, in BAs and so forth, related to the industry of that region. But usually we don't see that when it comes to agriculture, to sustainable agriculture, even when we see that this is relevant in the context of that town, of that region. And so it's an effort, not just a political one. It's an integrated effort of the entire society to help new farmers to get what they need to work, to help young people to have a good traineeship and good formation, especially in sustainable practices in agriculture. And what we can do at the political level is to create the conditions, to raise awareness, to create the legal frames that will facilitate, that will boost this transformation of our food agricultural agri-food systems. Sorry, not being a native speaker, because I have lots of ideas in my mind and I have to be, trying to translate them into the right words in English. So this was a sort of organic and spontaneous approach to this question, because I don't have an ultimate answer to this, but I think you can find along what I said a few lines of how I position myself in regard to this question. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Isabel. I think while you were speaking and raising quite important points that have been always discussed within ECVC, there were a lot of questions in the chat. So I hope we have time to go into them when it comes about education, who has access to education and how much funding goes to conventional farming, how much funding goes to agroecology. It's a big gap, how the funding is also allocated at the CAP. So I hope we have time for this. Before that, I have a last question for Maria, and then we will go to the question from everyone. A quick recap on what Maria said before, which it was also mentioned for Barbara, Priscilla, and also for Isabel, is that there's there's this need from young farmers to redefine what is family farming, to redefine new ways of farming. Yeah, like the old ways of farming are not very welcoming, and in this research we really saw how young people wants to start farming in a different way, more collectively, maybe combined the farming work with education, with practice, etc., etc. And I'm introducing this topic because the question that we prepared for this, it goes in this direction. It's like that the most recent EU survey on young farmers is from the 2015, so it's 8 years ago. So it's like, how do we deal with the lack of data? And you mentioned it before, so how do we deal with this lack of data? And we are wondering if the European Commission is planning to launch any survey to assess the needs of young farmers in Europe. And if so, how can we ensure that the needs of small-scale farmers are included in this survey?
Okay, so thanks a lot for the question. I have some good news, and this is that we have the census 2020 that has been just published, so I can give you some more fresh data. I fully agree with you that we need data. We need data, and if possible with less years of difference. We are always struggling with the member states because they don't want to to provide more data. And just also, I want to highlight that for the new CAP also we are pushing for new data according to gender, so that we will have for women, for men, as well as for non-binary, which I think it's an important step forward to have more information. And just to give you some very quick data about the 2020 census, we see that for young farmers the situation was going down. But then I think the turning point was 2016, and then we see a little bit of increase in the last census from 2020. So the average age of farm managers now is 56.8 years, which is of course very, very high. And the share of farmers over 65 years increased from 30 to 34% in 2020. But this trend is also to be observed in rural areas and in the EU population in general, although the share of older farmers is higher compared to the general population. Just to put one figure that everybody would remember, nowadays only 1 out of 10 EU farmers is under 44 years. But then what it's also difficult is that persuading young people to begin farming is a significant challenge, although we see some little changes further to the COVID and the people also thinking about new ways of life, etc. I will try to share, if I can, my screen presenting these figures, but I would like also to refer to women in farming. So generational renewal of female farmers is even a more difficult challenge. Before, I just said that 1 out of 10 farmers is under 44 years old, but in the case of female farmers, this is the situation where only 1 out of 20 farmers is a woman less than 44 years old. The situation also is improving, but we still have a long way to make. I will try to share my screen if I can to show some graphics. Yep. And can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. So this is also replying to one of the questions of the chat. You have there the different structures of the farm and the age class of the farmers. So you see for the farmers which are less than 40 years, and it's probably what you didn't expect, but the share of large farms is higher than in the other age classes. And in the old people of more than 65 years is where the share of subsistence farms is much important. This is, I think, an important figure. And then this figure also, this figure, it's also relevant. So you have the age classes of farm managers by gender. And as you see, the situation is particularly challenging for the females of less than 40 years old. Yes, I will stop now sharing my screen. Okay. Yes, so I fully agree. We need more data. We do what we can, and we really hope that with the new CAP, member states will be able to give us more information. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Miss Maria. And yes, we know that the share of bigger farms is higher in the class age of younger farmers. That's why that's one of our reason of concerns, because we, in our opinion, this is a result of the difficulties to enter the agricultural sector for, we can say, people with less availability of capital. No, that's something that we are really addressing in our reflection, in our political work, because we think that it's really important in every European country to ensure the possibility for young people to enter in agriculture, to establish a small or medium scale farm, also if they have no capital to invest, even because the difficulty for young people to ask for money to the banks, I mean, it's much the possibility to get money from the bank is much lower, no, for young people. And yes, so thank you really for sharing all this data. I think we really look forward for some studies and for some other possibility to interact and to comment on the findings that you are collecting all around Europe. I don't know, Edu, if we have some Q&A in the chat.
Yeah, so we opened these last 12-15 minutes max for questions, and we've been collecting some of the questions of the chat and Q&A. So just a second, so we have so far 3 questions at the Q&A. I can read the first one from Jan, which was saying, what about the CAP? Currently, the money goes exactly the opposite direction, promoting farm growth instead of new entrants. That was the first comment.
Yes, this is something that maybe we try to talk about in the previous intervention, and for sure we can further speak about that, even if, because we really believe that the European Commission should put some binding thresholds or some binding measures, because the lack of ambition of some member states is really worrying for us. I don't know if there are some plans to establish some other some specific programs, maybe addressing this worrying aging of the farming population. Ms. Gafo Gomez Samayoa.
In the CAP, we have this objective to promote young farmers, but we have also the objective to promote the new farmers as well. So the 2 categories. And I think, of course, the generational renewal would be the objective that will really contribute further to the sustainability. But we have also this possibility of people that have more than 40 years old. We have, as I mentioned, these strategies that the member states have to determine. And I can tell you that during the negotiations for the adoption of the CAP strategic plans, in the cases where the member state didn't provide sufficient information or measures or ambition, we recall this and we sent to the different countries in the observation letters. So if you go, we have country by country, and you have, I think, in many cases, some requests for increasing the ambition for young farmers. I think it is also good to look at the good examples. In some countries, we have also some good examples, and in the CAP network, we try to through networking, trying to inform the different countries about these possible best practices, like, for example, some top-ups for young farmers, etc. And then also some measures which are not these specific for young farmers, but that could be helpful, like I mentioned before, the cooperation. But we have also this push for innovation and technological development. And I think normally young people are better prepared and more interested on this topic. So indirectly, I think this cross-cutting objective is also going into this direction.
Great, thank you, Maria. There was another question at the QA in regards also like collecting data. So I'm going to read it. That's a question from Genevieve, and it's a question towards someone from the Youth Articulation or any of the speakers. But it's saying, if we know what is the number of proportion of young farmers who wants to start a small agroecological farm, as regards or opposed to standard young farmers. And this person is saying there's many people in my area, but we do not have more general, if we do have more general vision in Europe. So question, Maria, if you would like to answer this question.
I don't have here at hand this data for organic versus the normal. I just had the graphic that I just presented about the different economic size of the farm compared to the age of the farmers, where I showed you that yes, that the older people normally have this higher share of subsistence farms. And that's the situation. But indeed, we see that the young, normally they are more interested on making the difference. And then, of course, organic is an important way to making the difference. We have a very ambitious objective to increase the share of organic agriculture in the European Union. So it's pushing into this direction. And we have also, through the CAP, important support for organic. So it is outside of this classical complementary income support for young farmers or the startups, but through organic also there is an avenue. And what I can do is after this event, I can share with you. I will try to get some data about the share of young people in organic, but I would put my hand on the fire that it's higher. Yes.
Yes, for example, in my country, in Italy, we say this that it's higher the interest in organic farming in the class age, the lower class age. Maybe some other questions are arriving, but I would otherwise.
I just wanted to answer to Genevieve as well. That previously, as Maria mentioned, there is data going back. That tells us that organic is average. The average organic farm is owned by a younger farmer. There are many more young people working and managing organic farms in Europe. That was the previous census, I believe. So it will be interesting that to compare it to the 2020 census, because I also suspect that it's a number that's increasing. And it's very interesting to get a survey across the whole region on this kind of information, because it tells us more about what the ecological objectives are of young people.
Thank you, Hatti. We have a new intervention, a new question from Jeanne about digitalization and biotech. We can say new breeding techniques and biotechnologies that are part, for us, the most controversial part of the farm to fork strategy. Why? Because we believe, and also Jean pointed this out in the Q&A chat, we believe that they can be a big issue, a bit bottleneck for generational renewal, because they makes unaffordable, even more unaffordable, the investment for establish a new farm. So we see that, for example, in different national strategic plans, big farmers, or once again, people that can afford big investments, just jump in also in the eco schemes, putting in their farm some sensor or some other techno tools. But for the young farmers that are starting from zero, new agricultural enterprises, it's really difficult, of course, to buy this kind of technologies. So for us, this is not really the mean to attract more people in agriculture. I don't know, what do you think about the social sustainability of this policy, Ms. Gafo Gomez Samayoa?
This proposal on the new genomic techniques is under the leadership of another director general. So this is the DG Sante. And we are, of course, on behalf of Agri, we are looking very careful at the possible impact on farmers, including on the, for example, on the patenting issues, etc. So from my side, and since we are not responsible for this file, what I would just do is to take note, of course, of your concerns. And this of course, this file is going to be discussed with the different directorate generals, and then yes, we are trying to see what are these possible impacts, and then to ensure, of course, that the interest of the farmers are protected. Yeah.
Yes, I was also referring to, of course, to precision agriculture, not only breeding techniques, but also digital farming and precision agriculture. I see that Barbara and Priscilla wants to comment on something before closing this webinar.
Thank you. I think it's been a really interesting event, and we are coming to an end. I was just interested in the 3% threshold. Seems very small that you mentioned that member states have to dedicate 3% of their budget to generational renewal when they elaborate their CAP strategic plan. Is there discussions on like raising this target? Because it seems awfully little. And to hear that you may have had to send some observation letters to member states in not even doing that, or mentioning that some states still do only 3%. How do you explain this limited? So where else does the budget go? And how do you explain this low figure? And are there plans to raise this target? Thank you so much.
And I just want to add that this is not mandatory. For example, in Italy, they decided to set a 2% threshold.
And this was, I think, in the previous CAP. Now the threshold, actually in the previous CAP, it was 2%. And now, after a lot of negotiations and discussions, it has been increased to 3%. And you have to understand also, as I mentioned, that the situation across countries is different. So we have some countries which are doing quite well on generational renewal, and some others that not at all. And the problem is that we give the menu to everybody, the same menu. So if you put a very rigid threshold, I think it will not work. But as I said, on the one hand, you have the budget, but then you have other elements, and these strategies that I mentioned. And it is important also to see that what are the reasons behind the lack of generational renewal. What we hear is not that the support is not sufficient, but we hear access to land and access to credit or financing. These are the two main reasons that we are hearing. On access to land, this is the competence of member states. We are trying to look more into this issue, and we discuss also with the team of Isabel Carballais, and I think it's probably something that is going to be reflected in this. And then on access to finance and to credit, we are working with the European Investment Bank, and we have a specific program for young farmers that, according to the information I have from my colleagues, I think it's working quite well. And just to see that according to the forecast from member states, in principle, in this period from 2023-2027, we expect to have almost 400,000 new young farmers, and I think this is quite a good figure. So I think it's important to look not only at the budget, but at the whole panorama and the different possibilities. And of course, you have also other measures that even if they are not specific for young farmers, they benefit young farmers, like, for example, this organic that was mentioned, or all this support going to environment and climate, which is 35% of the total, and where we see that the young normally, they are very much committed to these objectives.
Thank you. Well, I think our time is going to an end, and I don't know if we have some final remarks from the other speakers, from the chat box. I'm just having a look again. I don't know, Edu, what do you think? There is another question about, for example, we can take this last one about the chemical exposure to chemical pesticides. So it's part of the farm to fork strategy to reduce by 50% the use of chemicals, pesticide by 2030. And we think that, of course, this is a burning issue also for young farmers and for young land workers that are exposed to this risk. I see that so some new data about the monitoring of these objectives are going to be published by other unit of DG Agri, and I don't know if you have some comment on that, and if you are, we can say, positive on the achievement of this objective.
Well, now we have this proposal, which is the sustainable use of pesticides regulation, which I think it is a very ambitious legislation. We are currently discussing it with the Council and with the European Parliament. So we are really in the heart of the discussions. Again, it is in the hands of our colleagues from DG Sante, but of course we are following it very, very closely, because I think it is, of course, very relevant for the agricultural sector. But indeed, I think we have very ambitious objectives on the reductions of pesticides, and we believe that this proposal for regulation, I think it goes into the good direction. Discussions have started only a couple of months ago, and I think it's going to be a long way. But I invite you to follow this, and of course, if needed, get in touch with me bilaterally, and we can provide you some information. But on this, I think information is changing almost on a daily basis because of the negotiations with the other institutions.
Thanks, Maria. I have also a quick question to Barbara and Priscilla regarding this topic also, because in the research, there was some mentioning about some of the people interviewed about their exposure to chemicals and from young farmers, if I remember well. So I'm just wondering how did you experience the interview and talk to them, and if there's any actually direct solutions on this, because sometimes we can wait to commission and others to actually act. But yeah, just wondering how was the experience for you to interview people in these regards.
I want to highlight this was only a few people actually, because as has been said, the people that we spoke to were mostly linked to the ECVC Youth Articulation and have made a conscious decision to work on smaller organic or agroecological farms where the use of such harmful pesticides is of course much lower or inexistent. But some of them even indicated that they enjoyed working on such farms because of that, because they're not putting their health at risk. But indeed, some have had the experience of working on plantations or working as migrants in different EU countries and being exposed to quite very difficult and challenging working conditions with health impacts. So this was something that was not the main focus of our study, but it did come up, including in a study focusing on people working on smaller farms. So we think this is really important topic to address, and it's timely. Thank you. I don't know if you want to add to that. Thank you. Yeah, maybe as we are closing, we can just say a few goodbye words again, just to thank all of you who have come, and that we hope to see continued discussions on this important topic. And thank you again.
Thank you, Ida. Thanks for clarifying this. Indeed, most of the people into it were ECVC members, but still some remarks on that. So thanks for clarifying. And yeah, I think we're running a bit out of time already, so it's time to finish. So I'm gonna close this up. Pierre, please feel free to jump in. But thanks a lot again, Barbara, Priscilla, for the amazing time and dedication. Hattie for the support and representing youth, all the youth articulation that have been for a year and a half behind the screens, like doing monthly, weekly meetings on all this, and also support also from the ECVC crew. Thanks a lot for all the people being there behind. Maria, Rafa, pleasure, thanks a lot, and all the other participants here, and of course all the people who joined today the call. And always super important to recognize the work of all the interpreters that have been always supporting ECVC. Thanks, big thanks. Pierre, if you want to say a few last words before closing up.
Just to say thanks to everyone that makes this study possible, to our staff and interpreters, and to Ms. Gafo Gomez Galzamayoa, because the availability and the availability to debate with us is really welcomed, and we really thank you. See you next time.
Thank you very much. A pleasure.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.